It's like the four fucking monkeys. Pull it back a bit.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
So that's camera work for you. That's how professional we are. Zoom in and zoom out. All right, thank you all for turning up today, guys. We're going to be reviewing American whiskies with the ambassador from CCA, is it?
Yeah, brand ambassador.
Brand ambassador.
Yeah,
newly promoted at that.
Yeah.
We've known Brady for years. One of my more favourite reps / ambassadors to deal with. Just seems to know he knows his stuff, which is good. And I have to say that the number of events that we did together were pretty awesome. Like we'll go through.
We've done quite a few events in our time up here, and it's always been good to come up here
and actually have a drinky poo.
Yeah, we kind of run a bit of a muck, but
well, as muck as we get, really. See, this is our camera work working again.
Perfect.
But yeah, so Brady's graciously come up from Brisbane to do this with us, and he's going to take us through some of their portfolio of American whiskey and give us a background and history on American whiskey. As usual, though, I'm being joined by Pat, our novice drinker, Dan, who's slightly trying to get in camera shot, who's
camera really hates me.
Yeah, you're not loved by the camera.
It keeps moving in.
There you go. Who is the knowledgeable one? The guy who's been under me for 10 years in many different aspects.
What you say.
And I'm a bit of a know-it-all. I'm Andrew. So, Brady, tell us a little bit about the background of American whiskey, how it sort of started.
Yeah, sweet. So, I guess the best place to start is Scotland, or Ireland, I guess, just to take it all the way back. So, the Irish were the first people to have written evidence of making whiskey in the early 1400s, and then about a century later, the Scottish decided to write it down. So it's kind of whether they were too drunk for a century to actually write it down, that they were making whiskey as well. And then obviously there was a lot of things that happened in Scotland that like certain taxes, a lot of distilleries moving around, shutting down, and a lot of immigrants moved over to America. And it not only was making whiskey a way for them to keep their corn and keep their grains as a way to sell when there was a bad season, but also just a way to improve profits as well. So I guess American whiskey first started, I guess there weren't the regulations around to what we call whiskey today, but the foundations of American whiskey were built on a lot of immigrants coming over trying to create a whiskey, usually quite rye heavy, and corn grows better in America than barley does, so that's why they started using corn, and also it's quite sweet, lots of sugar, so it's very easy to make a whiskey.
So really fermentable and really...
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess that's the foundations of that, and then obviously through the years, lots and lots of distilleries popped up. Like before Prohibition, there were hundreds of distilleries, and then once 1920 hit and Prohibition, I think there was all but 4 shut.
How'd those 4 stay open?
So, for medicinal purposes. So, you could get your doctor to write yourself a script. So, which was pretty lucky. But
3 quarts of gin and 2 litres of whiskey.
I think a bit of money changed hands for that medicinal.
And these days,
absolutely.
These days it's also and half a pound of that green stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But back then, also like 1920 wasn't just 1920 and then boom, Prohibition hit. Obviously, there was different states before that and different counties that were dry states a long time before that, and that all happened because of the suffrage movement, which was a lot to do with drunkards beating their wives and so that's kind of like, and they were too drunk to go to work, so a lot of these battered women got together and said, hey, we're sick of our husbands not going to work and making money and being crumbs. Let's try and cut down that alcohol. So that's how prohibition kind of kicked off. And
So the states made their own prohibitions, and then federally it was adopted as prohibition overall, or was it a completely state-driven thing?
it was a completely state-driven thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it was
yeah.
federal law in 19...
1920. So
1920,
yeah,
then it was
1920 it hit,
federal
but
law.
yeah, it was federal law until 1933.
Yeah.
But there were states that went against the federal law as well. So I guess kind of like you were saying, like with California now with their weed laws and stuff, where it's legal their state, but
Not
then
in the next one
federally,
either.
yeah. So I guess the same kind of thing with the alcohol and prohibition, which
Yeah, I was going to say we did find that because there was, as you said, certain states, particularly the more mid-western states and some of the northern states, started going towards that prohibition area earlier, and about 1914 to 1916, I think
Very
it was.
laggy, isn't it?
And
Yeah,
then
'cause you're still not in the picture.
Then all of a sudden, when federal law came in 1920,
Yeah,
and then it finished
yeah.
in 1933, it wasn't until 1956 that the actual prohibition really ended.
yeah.
And because there were states that were still dry.
Yeah, well,
that's right.
when you look at what is it, the Lynchburg, Tennessee, that's still a dry
Yeah.
county, isn't it?
That's
Yeah,
it.
so,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
the only state where you can't drink Jack Daniels, and that's where it's
Yeah.
That's
made.
where it's made.
Yeah,
that's where it's made.
yeah, you can't drink Jack Daniels in.
I think you can sample it at the distillery. But
Yeah.
you can't buy
I think you have
it
to
to
sign.
in
I
the-
think you have to sign something to be able to sample
They
it.
got some really weird laws.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really nuts.
Yeah, so there are still dry counties out there, but it's like the American regulations around it, and I guess the most important thing to come from talking about prohibition is the laws afterwards, because when you think about afterwards, everyone, not only did the distilleries close, they also had to tip out all of their liquids. So what they did to try and come back from that was a lot of these pop-up distilleries, like basically people that were moonshining were like, okay, well, we're legal again now. And they were making liquid that was pretty horrible, and there was no age statement regulations then.
Yeah.
So they just wanted to get liquid out and start making money again, because they hadn't made money in at least
all
13
of a sudden,
years. So
come out of prohibition, all of a sudden, you've got 20 barrels of whiskey already. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Where did that come from?
So it wasn't until, I think it was 1967 or 1973, that the American regulations, federal regulations, came into law regarding bourbon and what it is today, and what we think of bourbon today in terms of has to be aged for at least 2 years. If it's under 3, it has to say so on the bottle. Has to be at least 40% ABV. Has to be made in continental US. Has to be made from at least 51% corn to call it bourbon, and has to use charred oak barrels.
Well,
Virgin Oak or?
There's a lot of arguments about this, because there are some bourbon distilleries now releasing products with bourbon on them in America that are aged in like
Port
extra
and
wine
sherry.
casks
Yeah.
and port and cherry
Well, I've
casks.
seen that. That's why I was.
Yeah.
That.
So it is, but I guess we've always just assumed that virgin oak barrels, and that kind of makes sense to me, because they definitely don't use ex-bourbon barrels again.
Yeah.
But just from what I've seen recently, especially, well, we just released the Legend, which is
Oh yeah.
which is finished in.
Is yours working? Mine seems to be stuck on a loop. Pat, still not in it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, that's weird.
Yeah, so so many regulations. Obviously, those regulations don't follow around to all the countries that we sell it in. For example, Jim Beam here is 37%, and that's just due to our tax laws and being taxed by ABV, and that's why when you go to buy a bottle of high alcohol product here, you're going to pay for it, because the tax on that is just a slap in the face. Yeah.
When I was over the States, Jack Daniels was like a bottle of rum. $26 or something.
Yeah.
It's bugger all.
Oh well, yeah. I remember when I was in Japan, in a lot of other countries, Maker's Mark's 45% and not 40%, including America, and a bottle there was like $13, and you could also pick up. I remember I picked up an overproof rum there for $13 as well as that 73%.
When you think of the dollar difference, but $13 times 1.5 basically. It's still
so
cheap.
66.
but-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's awesome.
When I was in America, it was like, I think it was like not even $5 for a very healthy nip of like Jack Daniels and all that. And over here it's like,
Yeah.
A lot more.
yeah.
You just sit at the pokies over there and you
Yeah,
pretty
they
much
just give
you
you
drink for free.
Yeah.
Just pay the
So,
chips. That's it.
what's the major difference between bourbon and Tennessee whiskey? Because I get this question all the time.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we think of Tennessee whiskey, obviously think of Jack Daniels,
Yep.
right? So for all other intents and purposes, Jack Daniels is a bourbon,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't follow. If they wanted to, they could call themselves a bourbon if they didn't use honey charcoal filtering. And so another regulation in the bourbon laws is that you can't add or take away any flavour or colour
Oh, okay.
once it's come out of the barrel.
Yep.
So what they do is they put it through a honey charcoal filter.
Yep.
And for that reason, they call themselves a Tennessee whiskey. But like there are Tennessee bourbons out there, but they call themselves a Tennessee whiskey simply because they use that filtration process.
And the sour mashing doesn't really. Can you use that in
Yeah, you
bourbon
can.
as
Yeah,
well?
yeah. So
Okay.
we use some sour mash with some of our whiskies,
Yep.
but it's just that honey charcoal filtration is the
Yeah.
biggest thing, and like whether it adds or takes away flavour.
Well, it will because it's.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
charcoal
yeah,
filter.
exactly. But you can only add purified water. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much covered it off. So what we're looking at today is we're going to be starting with the Maker's Mark.
Yeah, great place to
Then
start.
going on to the Jim Beam, the what's it? Leg is the single barrel.
Single
Yeah,
barrel.
single barrel.
Single barrel.
Yeah.
Knob Creek, which is the small batch, is it? No, the
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
So,
small
yeah,
batch,
the
yeah.
small batch, yeah.
and finally the new release of Baker's.
Yeah, I know she got the new release there. That's the
Yeah.
first time I've seen that.
Well,
The
I was
new
sort of,
release, so-
because when we're about to Zoom it live, I'm sort of like, well, we'll do it Zoom, but it'll be the Baker's, the new one, and you didn't come back, so I thought, oh, you must have a bottle of that. And I'm lucky you kind of did turn up, otherwise it'd be like, yes, I'm getting all these flavours from this one. That's not what I'm getting from this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well,
So we'll start with this.
Yeah.
Start with Maker's Mark. So tell us a bit about Maker's Mark, please.
yeah. So Maker's Mark was released. It is a wheat instead of rye-based mash bill. So what that means is when we're making the beer without hops to distill and then turn into white dog and then stick in a barrel and turn into whiskey eventually, instead of using rye that adds spice, what we're doing instead is we're using wheat. And what that does is adds vanillins instead of that spice. You will still get that slight spice, but for me I get like honey and agave instead.
Yep.
But yeah, Maker's Mark was Bill Samuels Senior's, I guess that was his legacy, was Maker's Mark. And then if you've seen Maker's 46 around, that's Bill Samuels Jr.'s add on to that, yeah. So
So what's it called Maker's 46?
so Maker's 46, even though that's a great question because it is 47% ABV.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, is that a misspell or what? But it's actually just simply because when Bill Samuels was playing around with experiments on how to improve on Maker's Mark, because Bill Samuels Senior said, this is the best I can do. Like this is my ode, this is my legacy. And Bill Samuels Jr. is like, well, I'm up to the task. So what they did was hundreds of experiments with different barrels, and with Maker's 46, it was the 46th experiment that they did.
So the 46 whiskey or whatever they
Yeah. So it was the 46th recipe. And
That's good.
yeah. And what they do is they get, because we were talking about the brand new oak barrels. So what they do is they take ex-bred wine casks, cut them into like staves pretty much, and think of a mini barrel without ends.
Yep.
And then once it's aged for say 6 years, they stick this mini barrel without ends on it, these 12 staves into the barrel.
Yep.
Put the lid back on it, and then put it into the side of a mountain. It's basically recreating a Kentucky winter. It's really cold, and it's like they've blown out the side of this mountain, basically in there for another 6 months. And what that does is just imparts a delicious, nice little red wine flavour.
So yeah, kind of like when you're making wine, you can put a lattice, a wooden lattice into like a stainless steel vat, essentially.
Yeah,
You can
correct.
actually do that to get those flavours from that particular oak out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I didn't know how it was made. That's why.
Yeah, and so it's aged for a little bit longer, and it's also higher ABV and using those. But they also, another cool thing about it is that, like, you see those private selects,
Yeah.
and they use different types of staves. So you can use like a mocha stave,
Oh, okay.
and you can pick which staves you want to use. Out of those 12, you can pick how many of each.
Because I got caught up in an argument, and unfortunately I didn't have enough information in the argument to bring any points across, was that they said Maker's 46 is not a bourbon because they have flavour added. And this is the point where I was at a loss because I was trying to figure out how it was made, and I'm like, I don't.
Well, this was when the regulations are so strict and so tight. This was like, it's like, hey, if we can't put it in a new barrel, let's put a new barrel inside. Yeah. So it's still a bourbon. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I was trying to argue that it was still a bourbon because it's the one bourbon that I took a bottle away to a friend of mine's place, and we were just playing some games, having a good time, and I realised I'd emptied the whole bottle. And I didn't realise this at all. And he looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." He goes, "You've just finished that entire bottle." And I'm like, "Okay, this could be a very interesting end to this game. I'm not sure how we're going to end this one."
I hope you weren't playing Twister or anything.
No, it wasn't Twister. Not with my size, no.
It ended up being Twister.
But the thing was that it had such a sweetness to it.
Yeah.
And it had so much character in it. So this one, when I'm looking at this, so just, if you can give us a quick rundown of what we should be seeing in this, would be really good.
Yeah. So, first off, give it a swirl. It is quite oily still. Mm-hmm. Even though it's down, like if you hit 45% oilier still. For me, I get very sweet perfume and peach on the nose, like a little bit of tangerine or nectarine as well. Feel free to throw in whatever you guys are picking up as well. Obviously, everyone's palate's different.
I get flour.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, when you grind wheat up to flour, and you get that baking sort of notes coming.
Yeah. Like ground, I get you. Yeah, like when you're ordering.
Yeah. And that's what I pick up from anything that's particularly wheat dominant, wild turkey and things like that. That wheat sort of thing.
And wheat is becoming more of a thing, definitely. Like more and more people are using wheat in their bourbon mash bills. But like Bernheim, obviously Buffalo Trace and Maker's Mark are probably the three most popular of distilleries that use wheat in their mash bills.
So Pat, what are you grabbing out of this, mate?
Yeah, I actually see the peach. It's a lot more citrusy than I'm used to. Like, I didn't actually notice it because I drink Maker's Mark a little bit, and I've never actually noticed the kind of citrusy flavours on the nose.
Dan?
I'm bossed. I really don't do whiskies very much, like American whiskies.
Yeah.
So, for me, it's 40% alcohol, and it's sort of killing my palate.
I will say that it is quite charry as well. And do they use like a particular heavy charriness, or is it just a light charring, or?
Yeah, they very heavy char.
So it's an alligator char then.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I'm getting. Is again, you get those charring notes come in.
Yeah.
And in fact, when you're looking at blind tasting of a whole bunch of the same sort of coloured stuff, the way that I figure out that it's not a Scotch whiskey or an Irish whiskey is generally because of that charring sort of taste.
Yeah.
Because you can pick up a lot of these notes throughout, Scotch
Do they
whiskey.
use charred barrels?
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
It's usually charred. You get smokiness in Scotch, and sometimes peatness, obviously, with Islay. Irish whiskey is generally very smooth. It's essentially triple distilled for the most part. Even some of the peaty stuff coming out, like Connemara, that you guys do, you still get that quite round smoothness that you get from an Irish whiskey. It's usually a good blending of do they do much
light
of that?
Light and floral would probably be my best. Yeah, like when I think of Irish whiskey, I think of apples.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, I just get a lot of just punchy apple. Whereas whereas there are regulations around what ABV that they can get up to. I think it's 75.5% is the maximum ABV.
Add water to.
No, sorry. So 75.5% is the highest ABV they can put the liquid in the barrel at.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so what that means is that they're not getting like that triple distillation you were saying that gets it up to 90%. So you're still getting a lot of that original flavour from that beer without hops that we start off with. Yeah, that.
Yeah. So yeah, when you're talking about how you're getting up there, so vodka is what's called HRS, highly rectified spirit. So it gets about 96%, which is essentially stripped almost all the flavours and what they call.
It's just a white spirit, really.
Yeah. So, but it takes away all the flavour profile for spirits in general is called congeners. When you get to 96%, you've stripped a lot of the congeners out, and that's why there are regulations around what you can get it to. At 75%, you're still getting the raw material. So the corn, the mash bill, is what you're getting in the flavours. But the higher up you get it, the more flavour it strips out of it. And that's when in Scotch whisky as well, that's why they have certain levels for that. I don't know about Irish whisky, I'm not totally au fait on the level I get for that, but because of the triple distillation, I should imagine it'd be up around the 80 to 82%.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah. It would be quite high. That pot's...
And it is exponentially harder to get it up, especially when you're using copper hot stills.
Yeah, that's right. And like 96 point something percent is the highest that you can get no matter what. Like, you can't get 100% ethyl alcohol.
No.
Not without poison.
I'm getting definitely the smokiness out of it now.
Yeah.
They're using corn.
Yeah.
Do they use natural corn, or does America have
corn
GMO?
syrup and
No,
they have GMO.
like,
Oh yeah.
so it's made from hybrid corn, or?
Yeah. So the corn that's used in all of our products, Maker's Mark is a separate distillery from the Jim Beam distillery where the other three come from. But all the corn that we use is based from just like American farmers. Like I'm from a farm, so I guess I'm just thinking about like my. But a lot of it, I guess, it's not genetically modified free, I guess, but it is. Yeah, like it's still.
There would be big debates over that.
There's arguments all throughout America at the moment. Hawaii is the only place that has gone completely GMO free. And yet one of the islands in Hawaii is actually owned by Monsanto.
Okay.
And they grow nothing but GMO corn on that.
But they don't want it on their own island.
Well, no, the rest of Hawaii will not allow. They won't allow any growth in that.
But when you think about GMO as well, I guess like for the first 100 years, the pioneers of America were growing corn in America. Like they were modifying. They were modifying the plant themselves by like just hybriding different, crossbreeding, So a lot of that was done before. I guess it's just the assistance of like getting the best yield, I guess, which is for any business, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's not a huge amount of issue with GMOs you hear about on social media, but I do know that once you're able to map the DNA of a corn, and then you patent that DNA, that means any corn that has that DNA is now owned by the company is Monsanto. They own it. So therefore, if that corn turns up in someone else's farm, which would naturally do just from the way things work, they have rights to that corn. And in fact, there are farmers who have bordered plantations, Monsanto plantations, who have been taken by Monsanto for stealing their product. Even though it's a naturally occurring...
A bird ate the corn floor of the
exactly.
Shut out some seeds and grew corn.
So this is probably where a lot of it's getting its bad reputation from, is because they've mapped it, they can create a consistent clonal variation of it, which is bloody hard to do at the best of times. I mean, if you look at wine essentially is a clone. Every single grape is a clone. It's got a clonal number and name to it as well, and has now been, particularly by the CSIRO and the INOA, been actually registered as. So this particular DNA strand will be of Burgundian clone, I think it's B773, and that's actually
it's sort of good because that's how they've traced back. We've done wine tasting and gone, this grape here was found in Australia, and they originally thought it was Tempranillo, but it turned out to be the other grape
from another Italy. So this is the good part about it, but the bad part is obviously when you're actually working into the world of social media, it gets scary because there's so much stuff written down there that we don't know half of it. And Monsanto has not been it's a very litigious company as well. So they haven't made they've made a very strong rod for their back. So when it comes to GMO though, essentially when you come to this level of production, there's nothing left in there of a DNA. You're looking at flavonoids, that's it. No, I actually had not seen this one until this got sold to me the other day. Sorry, Dennis, this is not going to be camera.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought it would. So this is Jim Beam's single barrel. How long has this been out for?
Not very long at all, mate.
Okay,
so
that's good. So I was concerned. So when it turned up, I'm like, I don't recognise this one.
And I was like, obviously people have their own preconceptions of Jim Beam. For me, this is what Jim Beam should be. I guess if that makes sense. Like, for me, when I drink Jim Beam, I'm like, I love it. I just wish it was punchier and had a lot more intense flavour profile.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what that is. So, single barrel from the Jim Beam distillery, using a combination of different barrels from different parts in the rick houses, which we'll probably get into more on the last two products. But 47.5% ABV. So, got a lot higher, punchier ABV than your regular Jim Beam.
It's a lot more vanilla.
That's exactly what I'm going straight up. Like, wow, this one I can get.
Yeah.
Vanilla.
This is straight out vanilla toffee. You know that lovely vanilla caramel, I should say.
I don't eat it too hard.
You don't eat it too hard. Yes. So I get a lot more vanilla from this. So obviously the oak is a lot more prevalent to it. I'm not getting those really overtly sweet Jim Beam characters that I've seen in the Jim Beam White Label, which is kind of what puts me off the Jim Beam a little bit.
Yep.
And in fact, I've struggled. Like I was drinking Jim Beam when I was much younger, and obviously threw it with Coke. And then I got into sipping whiskies like Dickel 12 and what's the other one? George. Not Dickel.
Weller. You're on the stag.
Right. George Weller. I've been given a bottle of George Weller when I was younger, and I thought, this is amazing. And this is what made me actually think bourbon was more than just a mixing whiskey.
Yeah.
And this is what I actually have tried to impart to people, but unfortunately, a lot of Australia. I think the sales of bourbon in Australia are really quite high, but they're all essentially mixing bourbon.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So when you look at the market categories, and when you separate it into like budget, value, premium, super premium, which is just different price points. I can't remember exactly, but obviously if you think like super premium's anything over like $65.
Is that super?
That's pretty premium, not now.
I know. It's just the way that the market's.
Did you not see the $600 bottle of Hibiki just go out the door?
That was in my pocket. That's where it went. You were wondering where it was on the shelf.
No, fast way too.
But the bourbon is the one. Like when you look at Scotch sales and gin sales, a lot of the markets is going super premium, like at 15% per year in Australia.
Yep.
Whereas with bourbon, it's a lot lower. It's still in single digit growth. It's around 8%. But when you compare it to other categories that are quite popular, that's the biggest difference. Is that? But I think honestly, I know it's been Japanese whiskey, but I think bourbon's going to make a comeback, and maybe we can go into the history of like the 80s and how small batch and boutique bourbon became a thing. But for me, when you're talking about that sweetness and kind of what put you off, I think the best thing about once you drop that ABV, you lose so much flavour profile. Like you literally 10% higher alcohol volume. You're getting so much more flavour that was originally in the barrel. So
yeah, because that's what we talk about when it comes to when the word balance is used in our tastings. We talk about high alcohol wines, so 14.5 to 15% alcohol wines need high flavonoids or esters and terpenes to balance off the flavours. Otherwise, it'll just look, without the high alcohol, looks just overtly sweet.
Yep.
With too high alcohol, it's too warm and actually burns away the flavours there. So when we're essentially watering down Jim Beam for our market in Australia, going down to 37%, taking it down from 45, 42 in America, or is it 40?
I think it's 43.
43.
Yeah,
so
I'm not too sure. Yeah. So
that's a full strength beer drop.
Yeah.
So therefore, the flavours that sit in there, that obviously would balance off quite nicely at 45%, being cut back, the flavour would still be quite intense, and the alcohol drops, and that balance of alcohol to flavour makes it look sweeter than this does.
You get a lot of sweet. Yeah. You get a lot more sweetness on the front palate for sure. Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. If you gave me this blind and I'll give me another half bottle and I will be. I honestly wouldn't have picked that anywhere near as a Jim Beam at all, and that includes their upper echelon stuff too. I would have picked that far more towards, Dickel 12 or what's one that we had it the other day. There's a Pappy 10 that I tried. This is sort of the flavour profile I've seen in that.
Yeah.
You know, not quite as intense as that, but still got the intensity and the flavour. So yeah, this is really lovely. I'm actually really happy about this one.
I was drinking some Lot B last night actually, and obviously it's a different mash bill, but it's quite dry. And I guess the thing to mention about Jim Beam is, like, we think of Jim Beam, everyone's, like I said before, got their own preconceptions, but when we look at our super premium SKUs, like our Bookers, like it's the same mash bill. It's the same liquid, it's just from different parts of the warehouse and aged for different amounts of time. And I guess, like, if you don't mind me going into like the 80s, I guess, with the bourbon, like for me, this was the most interesting part because, as you all know, I'm a big Japanophile and obsessed with Japan, and they're massive bourbon drinkers. I know Japanophiles are horrible word to use, but
is it
we had Pinot the other week.
is it any kind of file? Which
bigger Pinophile is never a good thing to see.
But during the mid '80s, obviously it was the disco era, and vodka sales were through the roof, and
nightclubs were.
You think of
with Studio 20.
There's also the fall of the Soviet Union as well, so like Russian imports of vodka and stuff like that would have gone through the roof.
Well, the way the vodka marketing worked was like it was seen as a peasant's drink until I think it was Smirnoff brought out it was pretty much the ginger mule.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Moscow Mule rather. Sorry. So the mid '80s was a very tough time for bourbon, and there was a lot of distilleries shutting down. And Booker No, the master distiller of Jim Beam at the time, the sixth generation, and he was like, oh well, I think that my bourbon can go up against any Scotch that I've had. Obviously, like, in his accent, and he's a big boy with a big personality, lovely man. And so what he did was he bottled some of his older stock from right at the top of the warehouse in old wine bottles and gave it away as Christmas presents. And this was in about 1984. And the people that tried that, he just gave it to friends and family, and they loved it. They're like, this is unreal. Like, why aren't more people doing this? And you got to remember, back then you could get different age statements, but there was no real small batch or single barrel happening in any distillery. So, so themselves, and they released, I think it was the Bookers first. The Bookers, the Bakers, and the Basil Haydens and the Knob Creek were all part of that original small batch range.
You so needed a candle maker of that.
Yeah, that's right. And Blanton's as well were also part of that first small batch bourbon range. And the reason I bring it back to Japan, I was talking about Japan, is it suits their palate, bourbon does, and they, during that disco era where all the distilleries were closing and no one was buying bourbon sales were actually rocketing in Japan.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and
does that have anything to do with karaoke?
Probably everything to do with karaoke.
The most evil thing sent out by Japan.
And they still today, as a sign of gratitude to the Japanese, they still get a lot of exclusive bottles in Japan from bourbon distilleries, especially Blanton's. Like, they get the black bottle, and I think it's the red label as well. That's are two Japan exclusives, as well as pretty much most distilleries that were assisted by them at that time do exclusive releases for Japan for that reason. Another one that I'm thinking of, kind of looks like the Cologne bottle, I.W. Harper.
Oh
I think they did a few exclusives as well for Japan. So
this is essentially the same mash bill as your standard Jim Beam.
Correct.
Left at 47%. The barrel's sourced particularly from
the bottom third of the warehouse, or the rick house rather, just the higher end of the bottom third of the rick house.
Okay, what's a rick house?
So rick houses are where we keep all our barrels. You might have or casks. Yeah. We're the only place that really calls them barrels. They are casks everywhere else, I guess. And yeah, you might have heard in the news about a year ago, a bit longer ago, when one of ours got struck by lightning and absolutely.
Yeah. And the column of fire.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and just destroyed like 45,000 or 45 million gallons, some ridiculous amount. It was 5% of our whole total whiskey holdings.
I remember that would have gone
like in those barrels at the time. What sort of percentage alcohol was that?
Yeah, like it'd be 60.
Yeah,
it went up. Like once you go up, it goes up.
It is on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I remember it because we were having the whole gay rights vote. Yeah, it was Jim Minster. We were having the gay right marriage thing at the same time. And in that area, like in that county, the registrar of that county refused to marry a gay couple. And of course they took her to court, and then obviously she lost her job, and they ended up getting married and all the rest of it. And the day after the judgment came down, lightning struck Jim Minster, and it ran into the lake next door.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And this suddenly, like, it's on fire. So the whole lake is on fire, and then this water spout. And the whole thing just turned. It looked like if you were a religious person, it's like, oh my God, Lord God, either he's really on one side or the other, and I'm not sure which way I'm going on this one. It looked like it was a column of fire, and I was I watched it on YouTube going, oh wow, that's awesome to watch.
Yeah, well, like the rick house that got hit. So a rick house holds a certain amount of barrels depending on how big the rick house is, but it starts off at ground level, and then it's usually about 9 stories high, and then each story we hold about three casks. So the biggest difference between the bottom and the top is, so there's a 6-man team that work on moving the barrels around, and the bottom is quite a lot cooler, like a lot cooler than the top.
Yeah.
So down the bottom, the whiskey will lose ABV as it ages, because it's getting angel share, whereas right at the top of these rick houses, because they're so hot and dry, and because water molecules are bigger than alcohol molecules, the water will evaporate before the alcohol does up the top. So in some of these, just like right up the top, like with some of the liquid that we use for Bookers, they'll put it in at just say 60%, and it'll come out at 64%, 65%. So and it's one of the only places really in the world that takes advantage of that, and you don't have that really at all in Scotland. It's all about, you think about angel share everywhere, whereas like you're talking like it can be up to 15 degrees difference between the bottom and the top, and then you've got stuff like to try and regulate temperature, different heating elements down the bottom that release steam and stuff, and
trying to heat it up.
Well, when you think about Kentucky, you think of, I guess, like me, I think of like Montana style, just big flat plainlands and nice and green and very hot. Whereas like it can get like minus 30 degrees in Kentucky. Like it's a cold ass joint in winter. It's definitely a place where the hot and the cold, it's like two extremes.
Yeah, that's it, and it's actually numbered too. The barrel number is actually listed on here as well.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Wow, that's actually. So here we go. I'm going to argue. This is actually a question we get asked a lot. What is proof? Now there are 2 proofs as far as I can tell. One is the American proof.
Yep.
Which is, it says 95, which means it's 47.5% alcohol. So half of that is the ABV, or the alcohol by volume.
Yep.
95 proof. There is an English proof,
correct,
which is different and is a lot more, a lot stronger, is it?
Yeah, I believe the proof for. I'm not 100% sure on how to calculate the English proof, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it'll say 100 proof, but it'll be 70%.
Yeah.
So I'm not 100% sure on that, but I always just follow the half the proof, and most of the bottles that land in Australia are just like American proof.
I do love the story about proof, which is great. So obviously back through the colonial wars and even through the Napoleonic Wars, so the British Navy would have their rum ration, and what you do if you want to, you can mix rum with water and call it grog, which is where we get grog from. and it's usually like a pint of water to a tot of rum. And they call it grog. Well, obviously some captains wanted their crew to be a bit more not drunk, essentially, and would water the rum down. So, however, that actually broke. There's not many in the contract when you joined the British Navy. There's not many clauses. The clause that was one, you got a tot of rum a day, and that tot of rum had to be 100% rum. So what they did is the sailors, if they thought they were getting gypped, would ask for proof, and that proof they'd actually get the rum, gunpowder, mix it together, and then they would light it. If the gunpowder went off, then it showed that the rum was proof.
Yeah.
If it didn't go off, then it was underproof.
It had been watered
and
down.
it had been watered down. So yeah, that's where the story from proof came from. And I went, that's pretty cool. And then of course, obviously America, who were based on the British system originally, decided to go through the colonial wars, did something different, and made it. Yeah, it's proof. It really is.
Well, not only that. To add to that, and Australian history as well. We, like a lot of people, like one of our first currencies in Australia was rum, and a lot of sailors and the British Navy, a lot of them did get paid like a pint of rum a day, and they'd use it to trade with.
Room and board and a pint of rum.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's one of the only times in Australian history where the government was overthrown was the Rum Rebellion, and that was due to basically them coming in being like Australia's just raucous, like these guys are running amok. This is in the late 1800s, and they were like, we need to do something about this. So they cut off the rum rations and tried to install some law and order, and they ended up taking the Commander General and locking him up, and they're like, until we get our rum back.
That's why bottle shops stayed open during COVID.
Yeah.
That's how we became essential workers.
Yeah, so
is there anything else we need to talk about this?
Well, vanilla's excellent.
Yeah.
Flavours a little bit smokiness, probably for the barrel, but
well, it's not as charry as the other.
not as charry.
Yeah,
I actually get the flavour of that. But however, at the back when I breathed out, I think that stuff could kill COVID.
But it is 47 and a half.
Yeah,
so,
it's like, I had to hold myself back from coughing. It actually like, whoo, shit! I know I drank that.
well, we are ramping up here as well, aren't we? We're going from 40 to 47.5 to 50 to 53.5.
Taxi.
I didn't actually put it in order that way, by the way. It just happened to be that's the nature of that beast.
Yeah, it's great to
These
see
two are
that.
much the same in colour. This one looks a lot darker.
Well, I think that
Actually,
one was a
not
bit
in the glass.
darker. The Jim Beam was a bit darker.
In the bottle it looks really dark, but in the glass it looks...
Oh, I meant from the makers.
Oh, the makers
look more like kind of dark golden.
Yeah.
And that colour does come from, a lot of the colour from that does come from the oak barrel, but the charring part of the oak barrel too.
Like I said, like we don't have to consider colour additives like we do with Scotch when it comes to bourbon.
So they really don't colour add at all.
No, they legally can't. So
then, therefore, the consistency of the colour that turns up in bourbon is totally to do with the blending.
correct. Yeah.
That's impressive because if you've ever noticed on a shelf, and these are all clear glass bottles.
Yeah.
So on a shelf, you will see, and it's fairly consistent in colouring, particularly for rums. They're almost always the same colour that they are.
Yep, they can change.
They can add
colours,
they can add that E151A, whatever it is, 150A. So it's impressive that you can get consistent colour, but also does explain why over time makers has actually had slightly different colours. We had some non-rotated stock in another bottle shop that I was in.
Yep.
That was like Maker's Mark wasn't a huge seller in there. We got another allocation or another carton came through, and literally as we're putting it on the shelf, we went, oh no, we need to send this back.
Yeah,
because it's not the same colour.
Yeah,
There's something wrong.
Yeah.
So okay, this is obviously in my early days, but I'm sitting there, something wrong with this, and the retail manager went, oh, that looks terrible. Get rid of that one. Here, give it to me. And he went off and drank it.
What a sacrifice.
Well, it's hard life. So just
quickly.
Yeah.
Hey, Mum.
Mom's
watching.
Hey, how you
Mum.
doing? So just quickly, when talking about Knob Creek, so I've seen one expression of Knob Creek when it first came out. I think it was one of those really hard to get limited release sort of things that came through. Now there's actual 3 or 4? 3?
So there's 3 that come into the Australian market, and then any of the other ones we have. There was like a 20-year anniversary one, and there's a few ones that are Fred Noah, our master distiller, will do like a limited releases. But there's 3 types of Knob Creek. So we do the small batch, and then we do a single barrel, which is 120 proof or 60% ABV, and then there's the Knob Creek Rye as well, which is 50% ABV again, but just with higher percentage rye than corn, so it's hence a rye. But the whole idea,
I find that a lot smoother.
Yeah.
Does the rye smooth it out? Well, it seems to do it for me anyway.
Yeah, so this is the same mash bill as Jim Beam actually. Yeah. Sorry, so you're talking about the Knob Creek Rye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is not.
No,
This isn't the rye. Sorry, this is just a small batch. So.
Well, this just seems a lot smoother.
Yeah, well, we're talking
the higher
50%
alcohol
ABV
as well.
now. Yeah. So this is named after the creek that ran through Abraham Lincoln's birthplace property, and obviously has lewd connotations here in Australia, but not many other places kind of. It's not called Valiant Creek or anything. Yeah. So, but it's an ode. The reason why it's called that is it's an ode to pre-prohibition bourbon. So basically aged for longer than your usual bourbon. And the reason that is like we were talking about before, how after 13 years post-prohibition, everyone was like, shit, we need to make a lot of bourbon. Let's get the stills going. And as soon as it looked like it was ready, they just shipped it out. And so a lot of young bourbon, there wasn't much aging going on.
Yeah.
And then it's also wrapped in, like you'll see the newspaper pattern on there, and that's because back in the day, a lot of the workers there, they're hard workers, and the master distiller at the time it was kind of an unwritten rule that you'd take in a flask with you to work, and at the end of your work day, you'd fill up your flask from a cask and put it in some newspaper and take it home. Yeah, so that's why it's got that pattern on it as well. So.
Because Abe Lincoln was one that actually named the bourbon region, wasn't it? I read something about the plantations where they were growing the corn. He named it like the Bourbon, I think it was Bourbon County, and they named it after him, or he named it, or something like that, because it was supposed to be a homage to the French during the Revolution.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So it's really
so the French Bourbons. They're actually they're a group of people in France.
Yeah.
They fought on the side of the American Civil War. Yeah. They fought on the American side, and they fought for the Indian Wars with them too. Right. And so they actually, that's what the Bourbon. That's why in New Orleans.
That's a French word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in New Orleans, you've got a lot of the French.
Yeah, well, there's Bourbon Street in New Orleans, and then there's also like Bourbon County.
And French Quarter.
Yeah, I think the Bourbon County was actually named up to kind of pay homage to the French.
Yeah.
And that was where they were growing the corn, because Abe Lincoln liked bourbon or something.
Which is kind of explains a lot why France didn't do so good.
I won't put that on camera, but that's an example.
Oh, that's a slightly different thing. That's to do
it's
with
still an example of we got given that, and then the next lot turned up like that, and we went, what?
Same product.
Same product.
Same product.
Yeah.
The difference is, you might as well show it. If we're going to show it, we might as well show it. There is a difference. There is a reason for the so. Okay. So these are the same product. So they turned up, and of course we immediately thought there was something wrong.
Yep.
Technically, no, there's nothing wrong with it. But as it's a cider based on apples, the browning that happens when you cut an apple, that's literally what's happening with ciders.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So if you leave your ciders to age, it seems it does that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I was working in the bar.
We sold the cart to that before we realised what was going on.
Yeah.
Everyone drank it and was quite happy with it.
The darker one actually looks more appealing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does actually.
Right.
But yeah, it was quite surprising to see that.
So yeah, that's the French thing of it. The irony for me is that when France decided that it really needed help, they said to America, "We've just helped you out in this war. Can you give us some money?" And they went, "No."
Well, Abe Lincoln, was it Abraham Lincoln that was the ambassador in France?
Yes,
Yeah. So.
I can't help myself. But I don't know which movie it was in, but every time you say Abe Lincoln, I keep thinking you're saying, "Did you call me Abe Lincoln?" I think it's a comedy movie and it's a big send up.
Yeah, it was
A blind fella, Abe Lincoln.
Oh.
Well, I'm pretty sure it was a Vampire Slayer.
Oh,
movie.
stop it, you.
See,
I knew that was going to come up. As soon as the word Abe Lincoln turns up, like, yes. And he fought vampires too.
and this is what happens to the...
Yeah, and this is our third bourbon
Yeah.
we're on to now. So obviously bourbon is a very good lubricator and makes things much more socially acceptable.
Absolutely. And it's always had a stigma, I think, of just not having that same premiumisation as Scotch, and I'm sure.
But it's true, and I agree with that, because when you look at... so we're a very unusual shop, as you can probably tell. We're very unusual people. So
We're at work right now.
This is our work. This is what we get paid to do. I love my work.
We had to do this yesterday.
Yeah. So what you actually find is most bottle shops you'll see the entry levels like, the White Label Jim Beam, the 1907 Jack Daniels, maybe Jack Daniels, maybe a Maker's Mark, and maybe a Wild Turkey. That's kind of the bourbon limit that you get to. We actually do everything to the up to and including on allocations, things like the Pappy 10-year-old I can get hold of sometimes, the Weller, the top end Buffalo Trace occasionally if Wade helps me out a bit. But when I get people come in and they're looking, and they're spirit drinkers, they look at whiskies, particularly Scotch whiskey, they will be happy to spend up to and above $150 to $200. When it comes to Irish whiskey, they'll spend up to $150. If it's Japanese whiskey, they'll spend open-ended, who knows how much.
200 plus.
Yeah, 600.
Get that Amex black card out.
Yeah, get that card out. Bourbon has always been kind of a lower-end product through all the bottle shop that I've worked in up until this one. We do have a few good key clients that do buy those sort of styles, but they're not as mass, not as prevalent as Scotch.
But when they come in, they come looking for it.
Yeah, but
You've got a great selection. This is fantastic.
And they're asking some really intricate questions about bourbon that you'd have to actually ask the distiller himself.
Well, that's what this is about. It's all about education for the consumer. Bourbon's friggin' delicious. And even if you've had bad experiences with bourbon in the past, which is the same story you hear over and over again.
Everyone has. Everyone has
a tequila story.
Yeah,
stories. Yeah.
But everyone has bad experiences with a low-end version of the alcohol that they probably drink anyway. Everyone probably has a bad experience with a baseline rum, a baseline bourbon, a baseline vodka.
Say baseline wine. Go on. Say baseline wine.
Actually, say it 3 times really fast. Baseline wine. Baseline wine.
Baseline wine. Yes, but we know your goon stories. So.
So do the cops. Yeah, but
say I love that.
But no, because there's definitely preconceptions. Not even people drinking the bourbon next door, because they don't ask for what kind of bourbons do you got? It's like Jim Beam, and they'll be happy with that. But there's more conceptions about from the other people looking at people drinking bourbon. It's they're drinking bourbon, they're after a fight. Not maybe back in the day, but it's not a thing now.
And to add to that, I think a lot of people don't look at bourbon as a whiskey.
Yeah,
it is.
And look at it as a sugar kind of. They want a sweet drink that mixed with Coke.
It's a whiskey, and
people come in and ask me for a whiskey, and I go, well, here's the whiskies, and they went, oh no, I'm after this. You're like, okay, you're after a bourbon whiskey.
American whiskey.
It's a different product.
Well, actually, we've got a product in now, Brock's one's Westward. And that's an American whiskey, but it's not a bourbon. It's obviously made on malted barley.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And it's even stout cask finished. And I was like, oh, it's good. So I went to put it into the bourbon section, or the American whiskey section, and I went, no, I'm just going to go over here. Now, actually, this is what I've been looking forward to tasting.
Yeah.
So this is a rebottling, or a different bottle. The Baker's bottle generally was always like a wine bottle sort of look to it.
Correct. Yeah. So the same as the Bookers and the Basil Havens. But just a comment on that, it's not just a rebottling.
Okay.
It's actually gone from small batch to single barrel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So small. Okay, quickly just tell us the difference between small batch and single barrel.
Yeah, so there is no actual regulations about how small batch is. So when you think of because a lot of people think when they're drinking their scotch or their bourbon that it just comes out of a barrel and they put it in a bottle. Whereas to create a consistent flavour profile, what they're doing is they get about 200 different barrels, put them into a massive big container, and then bottle that. Or water it down to the ABV that they're going to bottle it at, and then pour it out. So small batch for us is up to 200 barrels, which sounds like a lot, but not when you've got like millions upon millions of barrels.
Yeah, that's 60,000 litres.
Yeah. So when we say small batch, that's out, but there are no regulations on what actual small batch is. Whereas single barrel is liquid from a single barrel going into the bottle, and that's where you'll find more differences in your colour of your bottles, like that's it. It's always been about consistency in the past, but now people actually want to experience that single barrel, and I guess that's what makes Booker's so amazing. Is the whole. It's always been like that single barrel kind of different alcohol volumes
How do they
each
choose
time.
the barrel? Is it like they taste it and go, "That's our best barrel. That's going to be it."
Yeah, so it's the master blender's job to do that. So the master blender will go around and take a spigot and take liquid from a bunch of different barrels, and they know the flavour that they're trying to recreate. They've got like a base liquid that they're trying to recreate, and then they'll put together a bunch of liquids from different barrels. Like if it's not a single barrel, like it's a small batch, or even just your standard like Maker's Mark or any other product, and they'll recreate that flavour profile. Yeah. Because you want to, because if you're in love with a certain product,
you don't want it to change. You want it to be the same again next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's intense. So on the
You go camping.
on the 2 tenths. Sorry. Single barrel. So it's even got age statement here. 7 years,
8 months.
8 months. Is that?
Yeah.
I figured that's what month. Figured out months.
And Tim, what's that say?
Date barreled second of the
2012.
So Baker was Jim Beam's great nephew, which is what Baker's is named after.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So and Jim Beam is still in the family. So the 8th generation, who's Fred No Jr., is about to take over. So Fred No Senior, or just Fred No, he was over in Australia a few years ago, and we sadly didn't get a chance to get him up here in Queensland. But lovely guy, just a big fella with a big personality. Yeah. And just a note on that, he himself and his father Booker No, they do this thing called the Kentucky Chew. I don't know whether you've heard of the Kentucky
Sounds like
Chew.
another language you're talking.
Yeah.
But so the
Kentucky Chew.
So the Kentucky Chew is when you take a liquid that you're drinking and you chew it in your mouth, around in your mouth for a second for every year that it's aged.
Okay.
So 7
7
chews.
seconds.
So obviously something higher ABV like this, I probably wouldn't recommend a whole 7 to 8 seconds because you'll get quite a burnt mouthfeel. But it is a great way to experience all the flavours.
I got the 4
Yep.
seconds.
I got the 7.
So the old Kentucky Chew, and I've seen. Well, I got to meet Fred No, and we were we put the master distillers of Canadian Club, Yamazaki, Lefroy, so John Campbell, and Fred No in a boxing ring, and we made them argue about who had the best whiskey or who made the best whiskey.
He made it out alive.
Jesus Christ, who did make it out of alive?
Well, all I remember from the night, like I'm sure everyone else had great reasons why their whiskey's good, but I just remember Fred No just coming up and he's like, "I tell you why, my whiskey's the best whiskey." And he had the small batch. No, I think it was the single barrel, so it was 60%. And he just takes a lid off, just chugs like would have been like a quarter of a bottle, and it was all in his mouth. And he's just chewing on it like it was tobacco. Like he's just sitting there, just like, I tell you, it's better than Listerine any old day. I was like, holy shit. I was like, I'm sold. Like, you win. Like.
And smoking cheese is great after holding it in your mouth.
Yeah, well, that cheese is phenomenal as well. But.
So yeah, this one is a lot more spicy than the others we've had.
Yeah, so this is taken from further up in the brick house as well. So a lot more heat hitting the barrel, so a lot more expansion. So when you think about barrel aging for whiskies, anything below around 5 to 6 degrees, the barrel will really stop breathing as much. It kind of just stops. And the whole idea is you want that liquid seeping in, and then as it gets colder, it pushes it back into the barrel. So that's why Kentucky and America is such a good place for aging whiskey, first of all, because it's that hot and cold's difference. It's just like the barrel's just breathing, just punching out. Yeah, exactly. And secondly, on top of that is you don't need to age it for as long. So when you think about Scotland, where it maxes out at 15 degrees or whatever, that's why you need that like 7 to 18 years to age a decent. Whereas if you drink a 12-year-old bourbon, you're usually going to be like, wow, this is a well-aged bourbon, you know? Yeah.
So just on that point, is it, if you were going to be insane and do something, say starting in Texas, you could do a bourbon from Texas?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I mean that's a very fluctuating climate down there too.
Yeah.
Well, it's all snows down there.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like gets snow and plus 40 degrees.
And you're looking at massive temperature variations.
It's like,
There are a few Texan whiskies.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bellstones?
Yep.
I think.
Okay. No.
Yeah.
You'd think for a country like Texas, like or a state like Texas, they'd have like a myriad of
huge.
they'd have a myriad of different distilleries.
Oh, that's right.
Like,
Yeah, you got a state that's called
known
the
for
Australia.
guns and alcohol and like rednecks.
Starting from Texas Rangers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't mess with Texas.
Yeah. Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
Hey, he got COVID.
Did he?
Yeah, COVID had to go on quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And that's what happens after fall. Cool. Yeah, so actually, well, I know we shouldn't, but I'm going to ask, what is your favourite out of these four then, Pat? What do you go for?
Well, I still think like, what's the price point to start with? Like,
Ignore the price point. Don't worry.
well, I think
Ignore the price point because I don't really want to say this out loud.
Well, no, because I don't like. It's like that's a brilliant. Like the Baker's is excellent.
Yep.
But yeah, if it's going in ascending price point, like I really like the Jim Beam the single
Legacy
barrel.
is the single barrel. Yep.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. Like I could sit and drink that on the rocks all night.
Dan, where would you go?
Not great for me.
Not great.
No. It's just come across as a bit smoother. It's still got the punch. It's alcohol.
Yeah, it's got the burn on the outside.
You've got to breathe out, not in.
Yeah.
If you taste it and then breathe in, you're like, But I find it smoother.
Mhm.
Not quite good.
I know you're the ambassador. Which one?
It's a tough question. Like, it depends what mood I'm in, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know this sounds silly, but I say this for when anyone asks me what my favourite whiskey is in general. But if I had these four in front of me and I'd had a great day and a good masterclass, I'd come home and just have some Maker's Mark.
Yep.
If I'd had
There you go.
if I'd had not such a good day and I needed something with a bit of a punch to kind of kick me into a good mood, then I'd probably look at either the Knob Creek or the Bakers, especially that Bakers. That's the first time I've tried that single barrel, and I'm a fan.
Actually, it is probably, for me, the Bakers is probably the most, and I'm going to use the word highly incorrectly, the most characterful because it's got the spice, because it's got the smokiness and it's got the chariness there. It also does have some vanillins. It isn't all just apples and pears.
Yeah.
It really is a lot more intensity of dry styled spices, particularly. I really like it, but I'm the one most impressed with is actually the Jim Beam. I would never have thought I'd ever say that, but that single barrel was just delightful, especially with the vanilla nose and the flavour. I think I did. You was. It's great.
That's it. Well, that's why I bought it. Is like because when we first brought it out, obviously we got the small batch which we use a bit of tawny port in, which is not according to traditional American bourbon regulations, but when the single barrel came out, I was like, well, this is what
A real true.
this is this is what I've always wanted in Jim
Yeah,
Beam.
that's like that's what you identify as
Yeah.
proper bourbon.
And that's what I use when we're doing like big events, like whiskey events with a bunch of different people trying it, and they'll have their preconceptions. I'm like, just try this, trust me.
Yeah.
And always they just go, holy crap, like I did not expect that.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, bourbon still does have that kind of stigma.
It
but,
does.
Like, but honestly, if I could get one whiskey drinker to like just have the smell of that one, I reckon it could open them up. Like,
Just on that, before
These are all individually hand dipped as well, aren't they?
yeah, correct. Yeah, for the Maker's Mark. Yeah.
And
they are
it is
hand dipped by.
it is proper wax as well. If you
Yeah.
light it up and put it on your ring, it actually leaves.
Oh, that's gonna
Yeah.
really.
No, well, there's a group of ladies that dip it.
I
and
think you showed
if
us
you
a
go,
video once on another tasting, like 100 years ago.
yeah.
I've seen it somewhere.
If you go there yourself, you can get to dip your own bottle. Yeah, and they do different dippings for like the Kentucky Derby and stuff like that. But
Well, it's interesting because if you go to the shelf and look at each one, they are all different. They're not the same.
and just before we close out, like, have you discussed before, like in any whiskey tastings, on like nosing and how to nose?
Oh yeah,
Whiskey
in
before.
general, yeah.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, cool.
Because it's a really important thing. Whenever we, essentially, the big takeaway for a lot of your whiskey tastings, even your rum tastings, your gin tastings, you really need to try to look past the alcohol, which is very difficult to do in the early stages of a tasting. But you might notice, as we've gone up, we got that last one, most of us didn't even need to worry about taking the big nosing section for it. We were already fairly inured to that alcohol. However, I still find it a really important part of balance. And in fact, that's why I was so impressed with the Jim Beam, was because it actually balanced off the flavours. It wasn't overt, but it still had some intensity, it had some punchiness, it did have some lovely charry oak to it. Knob Creek, for me, that was a lot more of that charry, but not as intense, a lot more smooth, more rounded style whiskey.
Yeah.
And that one there, though, this is probably the most characterful one that I had. And in fact, I'm really looking forward to trying that again once we're just going to hack her off.
Yeah,
And I
look
relax.
at the colour difference.
Yeah, that's
like,
intense.
Like, compared to like the Knob Creek, it's like 2 shades darker.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you for turning up today, Brady, and really appreciate you coming all the way up for this.
Definitely.
Thanks
And
for
I
having me.
can't wait till we actually can do this with real human beings again too,
Yeah.
because a lot of the guys that joined us today, we'll be watching this later, will actually be looking forward to the next one that we're doing, and we're going to try and tee up something, particularly with. I get a lot of people asking for Scotch whiskey, so we'll probably look at the Scotch whiskey for that.
Yeah, well, we'll dig into the peat or something. We'll go, or maybe we'll start off with Auchentoshan.
Yep.
Give you a little lowland, non-peated little fairy dust, and then just slap you in the face with some peat.
That's
Can you bring that container of actual peat with you again?
Oh no, that was Mark who brought that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark had a thing of peats.
For people to
it's such
smell,
a
is
reason.
With my trip to Scotland didn't get cancelled by COVID.
Yeah, that's gutting.
I wish Chuck Norris got to COVID earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ros can't do her UK trip. She was supposed to go in September. And now that I brought that up, and hopefully she's not going to watch this.
You still got to go home sometime.
Yeah, I do, at some point. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in, guys. We'll catch up with you next time. So remember, drink well, drink like a savvy. Cheers.
Cheers. If you can't be good, be consistent.
Yeah.